Ephesians 5 is where we will begin our time of study this morning, Ephesians chapter 5, and we'll read from there in just a moment. I want to say my word of welcome to all those who are visiting with us. Thank you so much for being here. We're glad that you're here. We want you to feel welcome. You're welcome among us, and we appreciate you taking time to be here with us. I want you to know that if there's anything we can do to help you, if there's some need that you have, some question that you have, if maybe you're interested in learning more about Jesus, we'd love to take time to sit down and read the Bible with you, talk to you about that, talk to you about what we do here. Just please let us know. I'm available to do that. Any of us would be willing and would love the opportunity to tell you more about Jesus, about what we do as we try to serve Him. But thank you so much for being here. We want you to know we're glad that you're here. Kirk has already said this, but I would be remiss to not mention that it is Mother's Day, and mothers are special. Mothers are special to all of us, but also the way that mothering is done well, we learn from Scripture. And as we learn that, and as we see mothers living that out, as Kirk has said, it's a blessing. We are blessed by our mothers. We're thankful to our mothers for the work they've done. And I am thankful that there are mothers here, including the one that I live with, who are doing such great work in raising our children. And they deserve the honor that they get on days like this, and probably lots of other days they deserve it too. But this is a day that's set aside for that, and so I would be remiss not to say something about that. Ephesians chapter 5, I want to begin in verse 22. Ephesians 5:22. The text says, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish." The gospel of Jesus extends to our relationships. We don't just learn from Jesus some things that we're supposed to believe. We learn new ways of living, new ways of acting, new ways of treating people. We learn that as a new Lord in our lives, Jesus is going to be the Lord of our relationships. It is not enough to love God, we must also love our neighbor. And so, as we have those personal relationships, God uses those relationships to sharpen us and to refine us and to challenge us. We learn things from the people around us. And Christians have a particular view of marriage that stems from the teachings of Jesus and of Paul and of Peter, that as we learn these things, we learn something different about marriage. We learn from marriage what it is to have faith and what it is to truly love, what it is to hope. And so, I want us to think for a few minutes about what we learn in our marriages. And so we're going to call this morning the School of Marriage. There are just some lessons that are really hard for us to learn outside of close relationships. And there are some relationships that are so close that they're going to teach us things, sometimes whether we like them to or not. And I want us to think about what marriage teaches us. Now, I understand that this is a lesson that's not going to apply to everyone who's here this morning. I understand there are some people who are single here, and I would encourage you, if you're single and you're looking forward to marriage, to think about how that marriage is going to go and what your expectations are for that marriage as we go through the lesson this morning. Others are unmarried and they don't see any prospect of marriage. And so I would just suggest to you that a lot of what we're going to say this morning is true of just about any close relationship. That when we're very close to people, those people affect us. And so what we're going to learn and think about are relationships and how relationships change us and bless us. So I ask for your patience if maybe this is not right in your wheelhouse, because this is a Bible topic and a lot of us are married and we need to be thinking about what we learn in our marriages. So first of all, marriage teaches us commitment. Let's go to Matthew chapter 19. We'll come back to Ephesians 5, so go ahead and leave a marker there, but let's go over to Matthew chapter 19. Marriage teaches us commitment. We see some of this in what Jesus says in Matthew 19 as Jesus is asked a question about how long marriage has to last. Matthew chapter 19 and verse 3. Matthew 19 and verse 3, "And the Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, 'Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?' He answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. So what is God's expectation for how long marriage lasts? It's obvious He expects marriage to last for the rest of our lives. That there is an expectation that marriage be, we wouldn't say permanent, but as long as both are living. Jesus wants people to stay married. Look again at verse 6. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate them. So God doesn't want man to separate a marriage that He has joined. I've talked about this before. From this pulpit, or from that pulpit up there, I have talked about how the Bible clearly talks about divorce and remarriage, and Jesus has expectations about that. I'm not going to re-preach that sermon this morning, but I want to remind you that that is God's expectation. And Jesus repeats this and teaches it in different ways in other places. Paul says a woman is bound by law to her husband as long as her husband lives. Okay, and then in 1 Corinthians 7, he says a similar thing. There is an expectation that marriage will be permanent. So, I want you to think about what that teaches us. I want you to think about, for those who are married, the vows you made when you married. You see in those vows, and I'm very interested in that because as a preacher, sometimes I officiate at weddings. I think that's the word. And when I do, there are vows that I have to figure out what the vows are that the bride and groom want. And we kind of go through the traditional vows. You know the traditional vows. They seem to be envisioning all the awful scenarios that could happen. And saying, now, in every situation, you're still promising, even if that were to happen, you're still going to stay married, right? And what do they say? I do. I will. So, sometimes we say, in sickness and health. Do you know that almost every marriage encounters really serious problems, sickness or injury? What are we saying? You know, if that happens, I'm not leaving. Or we say for richer or poorer. You know, almost every marriage goes through richer and poorer. So what are we saying? We're saying, you know, when things are really, really bad, I'm not leaving. We say for better or worse. Okay, I don't have to guess. Not almost every marriage has better times and worse times. Every marriage. And what are we saying? We're saying when it's worse, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to be here. Now, you think about those things. What we are saying when we make those vows is about commitment. I am making a commitment when I get married that this will not ever change. Whatever circumstances arise, I will always be here till death parts us, because I won't part us. And I'm fascinated with that because, you know, when we make those vows, we're usually not thinking about all those scenarios, are we? I've dealt with newlyweds before. Newlyweds, you could put anything in those vows and they're going to say, I do. They're not really thinking seriously about it. But that's what we're saying. We are promising fidelity. We are promising commitment. And marriage teaches us that in a way that few other relationships can, because we're going to be there because that's God's expectation, and that's also what we promised we would do. So, we learn what commitment really looks like. Look in Psalm 15 with me, if you would. Psalm 15. As a working definition of commitment, I really like the way the psalmist puts it here. Psalm 15 and verse 4. David has asked the question, who will sojourn in your tent and dwell in your holy hill? And this is the man. Psalm 15 and verse 4. In whose eyes a vile person is despised, who honors those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change. If you want a working definition of commitment, I think verse 4 is it. That when you make a promise and then it turns out to be to your detriment, to your hurt, you still keep it. You don't change. The business deal that goes sour, you keep your word. When you go into that marriage and you think it's going to be great and it turns out to be a lot harder than you expected. Maybe you say, at the end of it all, I'm worse for having been in this marriage. He swears to his own hurt and does not change. That's commitment. Jesus teaches us about commitment. Jesus teaches us to sit down and count the cost. He's talking about discipleship, which is a commitment. Am I going to be a disciple of Jesus? I'm going to make that commitment. Before I do, I count the cost, whether I'm willing to pay what's going to be required. It might be difficult. Am I ready to commit? And marriage is a way we learn all that commitment entails. That commitment is going to mean loving when we are angry and exasperated and depressed. Because commitment and loving is easy when everything's going well. That commitment is going to mean suffering with my mate and the struggles they go through, most of which are unanticipated. Because the struggles we have, we don't anticipate, we can't plan it, but commitment says, I'm going to be there when they come. It means continuing even when I'm disappointed in them or in myself. It means working on my relationship as I grow and change and as she grows and changes. It means learning to speak one another's language and learn their interests and finding their hearts. Even if sometimes as we grow older, we may grow apart, coming back together again. Learning to maintain a relationship. It means staying when leaving seems easier. When it just seems like everything in the world is pointing toward, why don't you just give up? That's when we learn commitment. Marriage is a blessing to us because it teaches us something in that close relationship that we need in other areas of our life. Particularly, we're going to need commitment in our faith. And marriage blesses us because it helps us to learn commitment. Second, marriage teaches us self-control. I want you to go with me to Colossians 3. Colossians 3. Colossians 3 and verse 18. Colossians 3:18. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. Did you notice that twice there are warnings given, once to the husband and once to the father? In verse 19, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. And then verse 21, do not provoke your children. It seems to me that Paul has a picture in mind of what he's trying to prevent. He's trying to prevent a man who is overbearing and harsh, who is provoking. He is trying to teach Christian men how to be in control of themselves as they deal with their wives and their children. That you cannot be out of control in these relationships because your behavior affects the people you love most, and it affects them the most. You've got to be in control. So marriage teaches us that my character flaws don't only hurt me. They hurt the people that I brought into this family with me. And he is saying you've got to discipline yourself about that. Go with me to 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter 3. As Peter talks about marriage and husbands and wives and their responsibilities, I think a lot of these things center around the idea of self-control as well. 1 Peter 3 and verse 1. 1 Peter 3 and verse 1, likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives when they see your respectful and pure conduct. And then in verse 7, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. So wives are told you have a respectful, submissive, pure conduct. Especially, Peter seems to be thinking about a situation where the husband's not doing what he should. And he says, this is how you behave. You control yourself. And then he speaks to husbands in verse 7, and he says husbands are to live with understanding and to honor their wives. So, a man can't just let loose because there is an honor and a respect and a care that he shows to his wife. Gentleness like that demands self-control. I can't just do and say whatever comes to mind. I can't just treat people however I might treat my enemies. I have to be willing to control myself. Marriage teaches us this because, when I see you in just a casual setting or just occasionally, I can kind of hide my true self. I can plaster on a big smile, and I can act like I'm somebody I'm not. But you know who really knows when I'm out of control? My wife knows. She always knows. You know who really knows when I can't control myself? My kids know. Because they're with me all the time, and they see everything. They know me. So my lack of self-control directly damages people who are close to me. If I can't control my spending, my wife suffers. If I can't control my eating, my health will suffer, and guess who suffers when my health suffers? If I can't control my sexual behavior, guess who suffers? Do you see it? Self-control becomes imperative if I'm going to have the kind of marriage I should have. Marriage teaches me these flaws matter. I was talking to Sarah this week, and I told her, if we weren't married, I would be completely broke. Because if I could just spend whatever I wanted and it didn't affect anybody else, I would spend it all and I would have nothing. But I have to control myself. Why? Marriage taught me that. There's also something here about my patience with my mate. I learned self-control in dealing with my mate because there are two people who are locked together in such close quarters that inevitably we're going to bump against each other. We're going to get angry with each other. We're going to get frustrated or annoyed. And there's such history as we spend more time together that it's just inevitable that there's going to be conflict. And so I need to learn patience. I need to learn that I can't treat her in a way that sometimes in my frustration I feel like treating her. I learned that I can't bring up things. I can't say whatever comes to mind. I learned self-control in marriage. And then, even longer term, there is the bigger picture where we bear with our mates as we wait for them to grow, to become the person that they're growing into, to let Jesus work inside them, to change them. And we wait, and we work, and we pray, and over time, things change. But all of that just comes across as I can't be whatever I feel like being. I have to control myself. Marriage teaches us that. Of course, I don't think I need to tell this audience that self-control is a huge part of Christ's expectations of us as His disciples. And so when I learn that, marriage blesses me as a disciple. Third, marriage teaches us forgiveness. There's nobody we bump into with as much regularity as our mate. So, here's where we get to practice forgiving. Would you go with me to Matthew chapter 18? Matthew 18. Marriage is where a lot of these Bible principles really come to life. Matthew chapter 18 is a good one. Beginning in verse 21. Matthew 18 and verse 21. Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Yours might say 70 times 7. Which, of course, whether you're talking about 490 or 77, point's pretty much the same. You forgive as much as you have to forgive. And sometimes we say that and we say, wow, 490 times, woo, that's a lot of forgiving. You know where you get to practice that? You know where 490 may be too small? Marriage. Marriage. We see how many times we have a problem with somebody and we have to work it out. We have to move on. We have to let it go. Just ask Brother Johnny how many times he's had to apologize in his marriage. I thought about saying ask Sister Nancy, but ask Brother Johnny how many times he's had to apologize. You can't count them all. Think about that. How many times? How many problems? How many things are water under the bridge as we live together for that long? We learn what forgiveness really looks like. In fact, there's some really practical things about forgiveness that I think marriage helps with. Look a little earlier in the chapter, verse 15. Verse 15. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you've gained your brother. Go and tell him his fault, Jesus says. Go talk to him about the problem. By the way, in Matthew 5, he says, if you're the one who's done the wrong, go talk to your brother. Leave your gift at the altar. So don't think that this is about, well, I've got to talk to him. It's not about procedure. It's about urgency. Whoever did it, whoever's mad, whoever, somebody get the topic on the table. Go talk about the problem. We learned that in marriage. We learned that it's not good to let problems fester. It's not good to say, well, she's mad. I'm just going to wait a couple of years and maybe she'll get over it. We learn in marriage that Jesus is right. We need to talk. We need to work things out. We need to learn how to move past it. We learn how to apologize in marriage, to really apologize. Not the one where you say, I'm sorry your feelings got hurt. Okay, we learn that was not going to fly. Okay? I'm sorry, and here's why. We learn in marriage how to express our hurt and our anger effectively without hurting them. We learn in marriage how to let things go and to move forward. And if we don't get it right away, it's okay. We get lots and lots of practice. We just keep hurting each other and then learning how to forgive. Now, sometimes the issues in marriage that we have to forgive are the bigger problems. Not just the little stuff, the daily bump and grind, but what's really a major issue. And in those situations, what we learn is how long it takes really deep hurts to heal. But that they can. And that love can persevere through some really awful things. We learn that in marriage. Now, the reason that helps is because a lot of times when we've been hurt or we've been sinned against, our instinct is to just run. Let me put distance between that person and me. Let me cut them off. I don't want to have to deal with them. I don't want to have to see them. I don't want to go to church with them. I don't want to go to the family gatherings where they're at. But marriage is not a situation where you can just run. Marriage is a situation where we face them daily, continually. And we have to learn how to live with the person who's hurt us so deeply. We learn forgiveness on a deeper level in marriage. Now, that doesn't make forgiveness easy, but it does make forgiveness an essential part of who we are as husbands and wives. We have to learn it. And when we learn forgiveness, we become that much more like Jesus. The last thing I want to talk about is that marriage teaches us selfless love. Let's go back to Ephesians 5, where we started. Selfless love. Ephesians 5, beginning in verse 21. Ephesians 5 and verse 21. I want to begin in verse 21, not verse 22. In verse 21, it says, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she should be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Now, I want you to notice that everyone in this passage is selfless. Everyone. The wife submits to her husband and respects her husband. The husband submits to his wife and loves her sacrificially and nourishes and cherishes her. The focus of both husband and wife is on the other. That's how the text reads. That's how a marriage should work. That's Christian marriage. I think of my mate first. I love him or her selflessly. It seems to me that in all the discussion that we have about headship and submission, leadership in the home and roles and all of that, we overlook the fact that husbands and wives are really given essentially the same command. So the wife is to love her husband, Titus chapter 2, and to respect her husband, Ephesians chapter 5, and to submit to her husband, Ephesians chapter 5. The husband is to love his wife, Ephesians 5, and to honor her, 1 Peter 3, and to submit to her, Ephesians 5:21. So, let's do the recap. Husband, love, honor, submit. Wife, love, respect, submit. Now, that doesn't mean there are no roles. Please don't misunderstand me. There are roles, and there is authority in the home and all of that. But it means there's no room to construe the roles into selfishness, so that somehow the wife always gets her way because the husband is sacrificially considering her. Or that the husband always gets his way because he's the head of the house. It's not about getting our way. That's not what selfless love is. Selfless love is not about, I get to be in charge. It's always about the other person. Marriage is an opportunity we have to demonstrate something that we talk a lot about. We talk a lot about service. How do we serve other people? And we talk about how Jesus painted himself as a servant. He did not come to be served, but to serve. Marriage is an opportunity where daily we can practice service. Always we have an opportunity to continually serve our mate. In little words that don't cost much but mean a great deal, in little acts that make her job easier, or in the little things that go unnoticed, but because I don't care about credit, I do them just to help. Service, real service. Marriage gives us the opportunity. But it's not just little things, there's also big things where we have to make big decisions, or there are big problems where I have to take her feelings and her ideas into account and respect who she is and how special she is to me as I make a decision. There is a transformation of love that marriage teaches us. You know, we don't usually get married and fall in love with our mate because we're really excited to serve them. We have romantic love. And marriage transforms that into selfless love, where it becomes about blessing them and helping them and working with them and making them better and nourishing and cherishing them. Instead of blessing me and making me happy, I want to bless them. That's an awesome lesson to learn from marriage. You know, Jesus talks repeatedly about self as the great enemy of the gospel, that we have to deny self, and whoever wants to save himself will lose it, and whoever loses his self for my sake will save it. Here is a golden opportunity for us to say, just in the ordinary course of life, I can learn to lose self in service to my mate. Marriage teaches us commitment and self-control and forgiveness and selfless love. Now, I want to say a couple of things about this. The lesson will be yours. First of all, marriage does not automatically teach those things. We can be married and never learn those things. Some abandon marriage when it gets difficult. They don't learn commitment. Or some people refuse to control themselves or refuse to forgive. Or they continue to seek their own good and try to maybe even use the Bible to get what they want. But when we choose to learn these lessons as we seek life together and we seek the good of our mate and not our own, then it blesses us. And the point of my lesson, what I'm really trying to say, is that marriage is not a burden. It is not a war to endure. And it is not the end of freedom. Sometimes I hear Christians talk about marriage as if it's the worst thing that could ever happen. Especially when you're about to get married and they try to give you advice. That's not marriage. Marriage is a blessing from God. And I want us to see it that way. But it's not just that. The goal is not just that we learn these things in marriage, and so we're committed to our mate, we have self-control with our mate, and we forgive our mate, and we have selfless love with our mate. That's good, but that's the beginning. Because it won't do us any good if we don't treat the people outside our marriage any differently. We need all of these traits in all our relationships so that we become better people, not just better husbands and wives. so that suddenly I know how to be committed to somebody who is a friend. And I know how to forgive somebody who's my brother in Christ. And I know how to love selflessly the people I work with. I become a better person, not just a better mate, but more like Jesus. So, I encourage you, as you progress in these things, think about what you're learning and how you're growing and how marriage is making you better. I would encourage you, husbands and wives, to have a conversation about some of these things this afternoon. I would encourage you to think about, what have you learned? How are you better because of being together with your mate? And as you do, I think you'll see it's not all bad. It's not a war. It's a blessing from God. Now, I appreciate your attention. I am not saying this morning that you have to be married to serve God. I'm not saying that you can't learn these things in other ways. I'm just observing a blessing God has given us. But I want to circle back for just a second and speak about commitment, because as I mentioned, becoming a disciple of Jesus is a commitment. Jesus encourages us to count the cost. Be sure that you're ready to give what He is asking. And so I want you to think about, if you're not yet a disciple of Jesus, whether you're willing to give your life to Jesus, to follow Him, to become His disciple. Let Him be your teacher. Let Him be your Lord. Live in service to Him and grow in becoming more like Him. That's what we're about. That's what we're doing. We are disciples of Jesus. And we are trying to become more like Him and grow in the image of Christ. So if you're interested in joining us in that, if you're ready to give your life to the Lord, and you're ready to have the forgiveness and the blessing He offers because of the sacrifice of Himself that He gave, then we want to help you do that. And if you're ready to come and be baptized into Christ, we're ready to help you do that this morning. If you have a need, we ask that you come to the front right now as we stand and sing.